I did whatever it took. I had to fund it mostly myself. I got some help from my aunt, but otherwise I wouldn't have been able to afford it.
Welcome to Working Women Mentor, a podcast for women in business with a mentor mindset. If you're working on a business or in one, you'll meet women here who you want to learn from and that will inspire mentor moments in your life. Let's dive in and share stories, experiences, and mentor moments with these fabulous women. Here's your host, Rani Alfers.
Hey everyone, welcome to Working Women Mentor. Today's guest is Keer Tanchak. She is an award-winning Canadian artist, currently based in Dallas, Texas. She is considered one of Texas's best painters whose work riffs, pays respect to, and is reimagined from all things like fashion, pop culture, and art history, including Rococo and Baroque. She received her MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and BFA with distinction from the School of Concordia in Montreal. Keer has exhibited extensively from Canada and the US, as well as in London, Switzerland, Dubai, and Mexico. I was introduced to Keer's work through her participation in a joint exhibition in Dallas, at Gallery 1226. The exhibition spotlighted each artist's interpretation of the female figure. And as you can imagine, a woman thinking about her own personal interpretation of my female figure, others, we all see it very differently. And I really wanted to meet Keer and learn about what inspires her and the mentor moment she could share with all of us. And she graciously agreed. Please listen in. You're going to love what she has to say. Well, Keer, I'm so thankful that you're joining us today. Your reputation precedes you in the community in Texas and around, and as an artist, as a woman, as a human. Thank you for joining us today.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, Keer, I have to get right into our topic of mentorship with you because we've chatted a bit about what we both think about what a mentor is in our life. What has been some of the best advice you've received or you'd like to share with us?
When I first kind of thought about this question, I thought about one of the most blunt pieces of advice I ever got in a very public setting. It was in university in Montreal, and it's not advice that I was not aware of or was shocked by. I guess I was just a little taken back by the setting and the community in which it was given. It was a painting teacher of ours who I guess was being questioned a lot about how do you make it in the art world? And we were all very young at that point. It was probably the first few years of undergrad. And he said, the only real way to forge a path is, you've got to decide whether or not you can successfully juggle academia. So you can be a teacher who still produces work amid all the noise. Or if that's not a good option for you, that other historical models of being, in the artist world is to either come from money or marry rich.
Wow.
Yeah. And, I come from, the West Coast of Canada. I grew up with a single mom and she was very radical politically and, we didn't have a lot of resources. So for me, this came as no surprise, really. And I guess the idea to have a man in power being comfortable enough to say that this was back in 1999 in a really progressive university setting to a group of probably mostly women, honestly, if I think back to it, it seems a little a brave moment.
Very brave of him. How well was this received amongst your group of women sitting there listening to this?
Well, I really tried to think back and let me kind of cycle back a little. This is a really beloved professor of mine and I admire him greatly. And I don't think that the way that it was said was supposed to be shocking or taken in maybe a serious way. It was just to remind us all of the realities of the female condition or the conditions of economics, really. I don't think people were upset. I think it was just kind of a reminder, really. And it still, I guess because it was so surprising, it stays with me. And that's why I kind of bring it up now. If somebody asked me if I was maybe teaching or giving advice to a younger artist, and they were trying to really ask me, like, how do you make it? What are we going to do? I don't have a lot of resources and I want to be an artist. I guess I would remind them of the history of what it's taken people to make it, and to be aware of those circumstances.
So not necessarily the same advice that he gave you. Would you give another woman?
Yeah, like I don't think he was saying like, you guys aren't going to make it. You guys
better marry rich.
Some rich dude. I don't think he was encouraging us all to do that. I think he wanted us to be aware of all of the parameters in the world.
I think awareness is always the first step, isn't it? It's like, hey, just be aware. You can make your own choices from there. But
exactly.
The reality, we have to live in reality, don't we?
Yeah. So I don't know. Is this crazy to hear? I'm not sure. I don't really talk about that a lot, but it just came to me.
I think it's not. I'm going to imagine that he's not the first person who's ever said that to someone. And I think that his brazen honesty can be appreciated. And you strike me as someone who is like that with most everyone else. So I think this is carrying forward in some way, Keer.
Yes.
Well, so how has this worked out for you being a full-time artist?
I mean, I think all of these things kind of factor into it. I have dabbled in all of these paths, really. I am currently lucky enough to have a partner that helps me, but I also live as simple a life as I can possibly make it, so that I can imagine always continuing despite circumstances. And I've dabbled in teaching a little bit, not entirely, but I accept positions here and there if they're offered, but I don't spend all my time trying to be full-time in the academic world. And I've done all sorts of crazy jobs. I've worked in the compliance department of a hedge fund. That's really crazy. I've worked on a television show painting houses. So I've done a lot of different things that help offset the expense of a studio life and working as a painter.
Well, something to support your career. You've supported it in your own way. I'm laughing at thinking you working in the compliance department of a hedge fund. It takes a creative mind and a creative personality, I imagine, to be in some of these roles, Keer.
Yeah, I think so. That one was a weird one. I called to an ad that wanted somebody who could translate some German, because they had some German clients and they didn't know if they could understand if it was an address in the letter or if they were being addressed. Like they couldn't quite figure it out. So yeah, I just kind of jumped in, and I think maybe they liked me because I didn't have any idea what I was doing there, because there was a lot of secret money stuff happening.
So you're blind to some of those things, but focused on what you know. That is that's a great compliance.
At the same time, I've always tried to sell my work, and I've been lucky enough to work with some really wonderful people along the way, and dealers who could help sell my work. I sold a lot of work in Montreal before I moved to Chicago and during grad school in Chicago, and that helped me offset some of the fees for school. So
what would you consider, Keer, one of the best investments that you've made in yourself?
I would say going to grad school. Honestly, the same teacher said, go to a good grad school. And there have been many instances where I've been like, God, I wish they'd never said that. Because, sometimes I'm like, why did I do it? But no, it was great advice. It was good. Just do the best you can. It's like having ingredients for a good dinner. Like, get your best ingredients. It was an investment in myself because I did whatever it took. I had to fund it mostly myself. I got some help from my aunt, but otherwise I wouldn't have been able to afford it.
Going to grad school, it is great advice, and I'm glad that that's worked out for you. What did you get from it? What do you when you walked away from grad school, how do you feel like that changed your life?
First of all, I would say that it's really about your peers. And I would say that the teachers I had contact with were all incredible. And I got bits of good advice. and it was nice to be around them. But the peer advice that I got was much more important and longer lasting, I think. There were a lot of them there. There were a lot of painters at the Art Institute of Chicago. And so I had, a lot of people to be in contact with and share my experiences with and find out where they were coming from.
It is about who you surround yourself still, isn't it? And everywhere we look, it's the same. You come back to the same concept. It's the same in grad school, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it was the right timing. It was like, do the best you can as soon as you can.
A certain amount of what you are doing is risk-taking in a way, because you are certainly taking a risk on your professionalism, on making sure that this is your career, that your work can get out there to the public, that it's not just with you. Mm-hmm. And to do that, I mean, how do you find yourself embracing that risk?
I guess I just don't have a choice. I always knew I was going to be doing this. And I think I just, made a pact with myself that I would do it no matter what. And I think a lot of the risk I took when I was younger. So, for instance, being in school and working 3 jobs and like sleeping in my studio, trying to do whatever I could to make it through. I mean, it's harder to envision myself doing something like that now. I think it's just part of me.
Yeah, it is part of you. You're actually living it and doing it. Is there a part of your artwork that you see yourself in? Because when I look at your work, and I haven't seen all of it, but it's amazing, number one. But you have a lot of focus on the females, don't you? Tell me about your work. Tell me if there's something in there that you see in yourself. I'd love to know more about the inspiration even behind some of your work.
Right. I've always painted images of women. When I was in school, I think I searched a lot for subject matter that I wouldn't have to stop and question a lot so that I could just get to work. I think painting really requires a lot of sessions of speed and kind of absolute commitment and just working through the material for years.
It's like getting into the flow of it. Is it a flow? I imagine it requires you to sit down and be in it.
Yeah, I just felt like I was young and I needed to work and not question too much. So I had a lot of painters that I looked at that kind of worked this way. They had subjects that they would repeat, and the output was exceptional. And I felt like that was the right kind of studio path to work from. So a lot of the work I did looked at historical paintings, and a lot of them were from the 18th century because there were really great painters in the 18th century that we were being introduced to. And I felt like at least repeating and interpreting their movements would be worthwhile while I was working through my own kind of like muscle movement and practice, right? But then you end up kind of absorbing the psychology and the meaning of those images and the political and kind of historical circumstances of what those pictures were about. I've kind of always intermingled contemporary and pop culture within the historical, because I think a lot of cinema that I was looking at inspired me to be able to live that way in my head, to kind of invent new contexts for characters and kind of imagine my own stories of people in different places and different costumes. So for a few years in the mid-aughts, all my characters were 18th century characters from Watteau or Fragonard's, but they had clothing on that was inspired by Givenchy or Miu Miu or Prada. And so I was kind of making like grand choices to like intermingle these stories.
As you describe this, in my mind, I'm envisioning a theater occurring in your head. I'm imagining a wonderful opera occurring, and which is why I ask, because I think that you focus on this 18th century French Rococo style and movement. When I think of that, era, I think of pink and curvy and a romantic almost.
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the most famous images is of Fragonard's The Swing. And you've got that young woman in a pink dress that's flying up, and there are two men kind of helping her swing along.
Oh, it's
And
so
this
sweet.
painting, I mean, it can be, but it's also got some incredible, like, heavy sexual undertones to it. This painting lives in London at I think the Wallace collection. And so many people have been interpreting this painting still today. I mean, some of my favorite painters are still looking at it, but some of my favorite sculptors and installation artists directly interpret this painting. And this idea as well, it's not that I'm working in the style necessarily of Rococo, but I'm kind of like absorbing the content from it and trying to understand it, live in it, enjoy it, reject it, have trouble with it, all of these things.
Well, and fashion has played a part of your work. How has the fashion piece inspired you? I mean, will we see you in Prada every day, or will we see you?
We wish. This is definitely the way I try to live that world without having to deal with it. If I'm in my studio, I'm, in sweatpants. So it's not that glamorous. And I think that's definitely, a huge factor in it. You want to be able to spend time with something that you don't usually spend time with physically. So it's a dream world, really.
Keer, you have a beautiful favorite quote by Yeats. Will you tell us what that quote is and what it means to you?
So this was actually told to me by the teacher who was so brash and honest at the beginning of our conversation. The quote is, "In dreams begin responsibility." And It's something that I think about honestly on a daily basis. Whether it's I'm making dinner and I'm thinking about this really amazing, luscious dish I'm making, chicken and rice, it's a dream, but I have to be responsible with it. And then maybe I get a call from a curator somewhere and a potential visit, and I think about what kind of responsibility I have to speak with them and give them time. It's not just taking. So you are giving, and it's just a nice way to remind yourself that it's a good cycle.
I think a great takeaway from that too is just that daily check-in that we have with ourselves, and whatever triggers it, it's that quote that triggers you. Mm-hmm. And it keeps us fresh, doesn't it? And a reminder on a daily basis of, sometimes a slap in the face is what you need. Sometimes it's a quote. Sometimes it's just a trigger in whatever way to get us back to reality and responsibility. And also the dreaming part is wonderful, isn't it? To just dream.
Right. Mm-hmm. I know. I remember first reading it and thinking, well, why did they tell me this? Do I look like I'm only dreaming? Am I being responsible? What does that look like?
Where am I in the middle of this?
Are people supposed to see that? So I questioned it immediately. And I think that's good.
That is good to question. I mean, that is good to question. It sounds like you're a cook. I'm just going to take a wild guess.
I totally am.
I mean, when you start mentioning chicken and rice and talking about dinner, what is your best dish? What would you make for us?
I don't know, probably just some salmon and greens, like just really simply done. That's a good dish.
Simple is better, isn't it, sometimes?
Yeah, simple is better. Yeah, that's good. I experiment a lot. I really love watching cooking shows and getting a lot of inspiration from that. Learning about little tricks and extra ingredients you can consider.
Yeah. I think that during the pandemic that a lot of women, and you may have been cooking forever, but I think a lot of people have picked up these extra nights making meals or exploring new recipes or trying new things. I have an herb garden that I've planted, and I've never had one before, right? So it's like suddenly I need my own fresh herbs to make dinner. But I think that during that time I slowed down a little bit even, and I cook more than I used to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's soothing sometimes to come home from work and whip up something wonderful and work on it, make it a project, and then see the outcome. The outcome is what it's really about. It's then judging yourself and seeing how well your dish turned out. Do you ever do that?
Every day.
You're your worst critic, huh?
No, it's all good. I love it. I think it's life. My mom was a good cook. There was another person who was really important to me in Montreal, my friend Goldie, who was a student with us. She opened a gallery and I learned a lot from her. She taught me how to cook Yorkshire puddings and pork tenderloin. She had like a British background.
Mm-hmm.
And that was huge for me because I grew up with my mom who had a really international palate.
Mm-hmm.
She learned a lot of like cooking from her friends who were like Indian and Japanese and Chinese. So it's really important for me to learn about cuisine from different people.
Well, you seem to have a diverse interest in many areas, from food to history to people, and it all comes out in your work, I imagine, and your friendships. And
I think so. Yeah, it's funny I do paint kitchens a lot in my work. There's one in the most current show, there's a kitchen, and I chose it because it was quite beautiful, but it looked not very practical. And so anyways, but I painted it. But kitchens I've painted in the past have all been black. And I really have this obsession with black kitchens. I think they're so cool. That's kind of a dream of mine.
Well, and
have one.
It is the thing now, isn't it? It's trending with black cabinets.
I think it's been more popular.
Yeah, yeah. So do it.
Right. No, they pop up and they cycle through all the time.
They really do. Keer, what advice would you give to a young artist just out of grad school today who says, I want to do this. I want to be famous. I want my name everywhere. I want my work everywhere. I want to be known. I want to be amazing. I mean, what advice would you give this person? Because when you leave grad school, I imagine, or even when you are starting out, we all have lofty ideas of what the future holds. And that's not a bad thing, by the way. But what advice would you give this person with a lofty idea of what it's like to be an artist today?
I feel like there's probably enough people in grad school who are advising and teaching that will hopefully have already kind of like tempered those concepts of what it means to be successful, because I'm a believer in like long term and not
instant fame.
Exactly. I guess maybe growing up in Canada, it's just a little slower. I never saw things happening immediately, although I do see like in the American system of kind of graduates programs, there's been a lot of kind of instant success for people. I guess I would just say figure out if that's what you want, and if so, you're probably going to be hanging around people who will make it happen for you. if you're that ambitious. And if not, try to like fashion an environment around yourself that's going to be supportive for kind of the long-term project of making work. If that's what you do, if you make work. I mean, a lot of people are researching and not necessarily having studio practices. So I think the idea that the art world is kind of so varietous, that has so many different practitioners, it kind of helps everybody shine in a way, right?
Yeah, it does. And it's almost a bit of a dose of reality with that ambition, isn't it? It's a balance sometimes.
I think little things like making sure your presence is the way you want it to be, whether it's a website or a social media platform, if it reflects the way you really want to be seen, that's important. If you don't want any of it, that's important to figure that out. Surround yourself with the people that you admire.
Great advice, Keer. How can we find you? How can we find your work? And how can we support you?
Well, you can follow me on Instagram, which is the easiest way to see new work. My handle is @Keer Tanchak.
Wonderful. Keer, you've given some great advice today, I think, not only to artists, but to women, to anyone listening. And so your story is powerful because you are creative and almost ambitious in your creativity within your piece is what is my takeaway on this. This is my feel for it. And so you're a true pleasure to watch and to listen to. So thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you.
In dreams begins responsibility. After my conversation with Keer, this Yates quote really lingered with me. It was one of my mentor moments from our conversation, and I so enjoyed her direct style of communication. She left me dreamy with interpretation for what my responsibility is, and a reminder to really, in essence, to synthesize what is around us and to reimagine it. I feel like that's what her art says to me, and that's her approach. And she had so much for us to unpack. Keer is an impressive woman, artist, and mentor, and you can find her at Keer Tanchak on Instagram. That's KeerTanchak. You can find this episode along with the show notes at ranialfers.com/11. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us spread the word, and leave us a review, send it to your friends, and follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to us today. Thank you as always, and please don't forget, send your mentor moments over to me at Rani Alfers on Instagram. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks for listening to Working Women Mentor. Help us spread the word to more women like you by leaving a review on Apple Podcast and subscribing. You see, your review helps Apple know that women like you want to listen. It only takes a moment to make an impact. Find us online at ranialfers.com/podcast. Check back weekly for new episodes. Cheers, and see you next time.